They said it was for my safety, but when the nurse whispered that my daughter had already listed my house for sale, I realized this wasn't love, this was business. That betrayal lit a fire in me I never thought I had. My name is Irene Caldwell, and before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I want to know where stories like mine still matter, because this one begins in my kitchen, with burnt toast, weak coffee, and a lie wrapped in a smile. The morning they took my keys, the sky was that dull gray color that makes everything feel heavier. I was standing by the counter, still in my robe, watching the toast curl at the edges when I heard their car pull up. My son David and my daughter Melissa, both of them smiling too wide for 9 in the morning. "Mom," Melissa said, sweeping in with that sing-song voice she uses when she's about to do something unpleasant. "We thought we'd check in on you." David followed behind, carrying a grocery bag like a prop. He never came by without a reason. He looked around the kitchen as though inspecting it. "You really shouldn't be standing so much," he said. "That hip of yours—" "My hip's fine," I said, cutting him off. "It was a small fall and I'm walking again." He smiled the way you smile at a child who insists they're fine after scraping their knee. "Still, Mom, we think you should rest a bit. Maybe let us take care of things for a while." Something about the word we sent a cold shiver down my spine. Melissa started moving around my house as if it were already hers, straightening picture frames, picking up my mail, setting things aside without asking. She pulled out a stack of envelopes from her bag and said, "Oh, by the way, we've already spoken to Golden Care, just for a short recovery stay. You'll love it there, Mom. They have activities, a garden, even a book club." Golden Care. The words barely meant anything to me then. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "A nursing home? I'm not moving anywhere. I just tripped on that rug your father hated." David exchanged a look with her. That silent agreement siblings share when they think their parents lost touch with reality. "Mom, it's not permanent," he said softly. "Just a few weeks until you're stronger. You can bring your things. We'll handle everything else." My stomach twisted. Handle everything else. Melissa placed her manicured hand over mine. "We just want what's best for you. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder. That word hit me like a slap. An hour later, my house was quiet. Unnaturally quiet, except for the sound of boxes being taped shut in the other room. They'd already called a van. I watched my life being packed away while they assured me it was temporary. When I asked where my jewelry box was, Melissa said it was for safekeeping. When I asked about my checkbook, David said, "We'll handle your bills for now." When I reached for my keys, Melissa slipped them into her purse. "You don't need to worry about those right now, Mom." I should have screamed. I should have fought. But betrayal doesn't arrive with thunder. It seeps in like cold water until you realize you're already submerged. They led me out the door gently, like I was fragile or stupid. The car door clicked behind me, and I knew I wasn't going home. We drove in silence. I stared out the window at the streets I'd walked for decades, my neighbors' porches, the old oak tree that used to shade our mailbox. Everything looked smaller, distant. Melissa turned up the radio, humming along like nothing was wrong. David cleared his throat and said, "You'll see, Mom, this is for the best. You'll have company, meals made for you, no more accidents." I didn't answer. I just watched the world slide past the window, one memory at a time. When we pulled into the long driveway of Golden Care Residence, the sign gleamed like something out of a brochure. White letters, gold trim, flowers too bright to be real. David parked, turned off the ignition, and smiled nervously. "Just until you're stronger," he said again. I nodded, but inside, something shifted. A small, steady ember lighting deep in my chest. That was the moment I understood. My freedom had been quietly signed away. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not unpleasant, just sterile. Like lemon cleaner and loss. It lingered in the air, coating everything from the plastic flowers on the counter to the too bright smiles of the nurses. They called it Golden Care Residence, but it felt more like a waiting room for forgotten people. They showed me to my suite, A twin bed, a dresser, and curtains that didn't quite close. The window faced the courtyard, fake ducks floating in a fake pond. The walls were beige, the kind of beige that drains color from your thoughts. "Here you go, Mrs. Caldwell," chirped the intake nurse, Janelle. She was young, with tired eyes, pretending to be kind. "Your daughter dropped off some of your things, and don't worry, we'll take good care of you." I looked at the box by the bed, a sweater, a toothbrush, and a single-framed photo of my late husband, Robert. Everything else, gone. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The hallway light bled through the crack under my door, a reminder that I wasn't trusted with full darkness anymore. Every few hours, a nurse would shuffle in, whisper my name, and write something on a clipboard. I wasn't sick, but I was being treated like I was. In the morning, I tried to call David. The receptionist told me, "He's busy, but he said he'll call you later." Later never came. By the third day, I realized what temporary really meant. There were others like me, women with careful hair and hollow eyes. I met Nora in the dining hall. She was sitting alone, stirring her tea, even though there was no sugar in it. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes were sharp as glass. "You're new," she said, not looking up. "I suppose I am," I answered. "They tell you it's short-term, don't they?" Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "That's what they told me 2 years ago." Her words sliced through me. Nora told me how her son had temporarily signed her in after a mild stroke, and how the facility conveniently lost her paperwork, declaring her competent. She couldn't access her accounts, couldn't leave without a guardian's approval. I felt the blood drain from my face. "They can't do that," I whispered. She leaned closer. "They can if you signed anything." I replayed that morning in my head. The papers Melissa had slid toward me, the way she said, "Just sign here, Mom. It's just a medical release." My hands had been shaking. I hadn't even read them. That afternoon, I walked, slowly, painfully, to the administrator's office. A man in a navy suit greeted me without looking up from his screen. "I just wanted to confirm," I said carefully, "that I can leave whenever I choose." He smiled, that practiced professional smile that hides a trap. "Well, Mrs. Caldwell, technically yes, but your children have arranged a temporary guardianship, just for your protection. You wouldn't want to risk another fall, would you?" His words rang in my ears like gunshots. Temporary guardianship. I stumbled back to my room, heart pounding. The walls seemed to close in, the air too thick to breathe. That night, I didn't cry. I sat by the window, staring out at the courtyard where the fake ducks floated under the moonlight. They'd taken my home. Now, they'd taken my name. And then a week later, a nurse named Lydia whispered to me while changing my sheets. "You didn't hear this from me," she murmured, glancing at the camera in the corner, "but your daughter was here yesterday. She met with the director and someone from a real estate agency." My chest went cold. "What for?" I asked, though I already knew. Lydia hesitated. Then quietly, "Your house, Mrs. Caldwell. She said you won't be needing it anymore." That night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat there clutching Robert's photo against my chest. The betrayal was no longer invisible. It had a name. It had faces. And it wore my children's smiles. But somewhere in that stillness between the hum of the heater and the buzz of the hallway light, something inside me shifted. If they could sign me in, I could sign myself out. That thought burned like a secret torch in my chest. I wasn't done yet. Freedom doesn't arrive like thunder. It begins as a whisper, a quiet, stubborn idea that refuses to die. For me, it started with Nora's voice in the dining hall, low and steady as she stirred her tea. "They can keep your keys, Irene," she said, "but they can't keep your signature." That sentence became my lifeline. Over the next week, I began watching, listening, learning. When the nurses changed shifts, when the front doors unlocked for deliveries, how often the orderlies checked the rooms at night. I wasn't the only one planning. Nora had been quietly collecting information for months. She knew who on staff could be trusted and who was just there for a paycheck. One afternoon, while pretending to read a magazine in the lounge, I saw a nurse helping a man in a wheelchair toward the exit. He waved a paper in his hand, his discharge form. No one stopped him. No one asked questions. The key wasn't rebellion, it was paperwork. That night, I asked Nora, "What did you mean when you said they can't keep my signature?" She smirked. "It means you still have legal capacity. Unless a court says otherwise, you're as free as anyone else." "But they said my kids have guardianship," I whispered. She chuckled softly, bitterly. "Honey, families say a lot of things. Doesn't make them true." The next morning, I asked the receptionist for the forms for a voluntary discharge. She blinked, confused, then handed me a clipboard. My hand shook as I filled it out. Irene Caldwell, 74, still of sound mind, still breathing fire. When I turned it in, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: control. But escape wasn't just paper. I needed timing, help, witnesses. That's when I met Janelle again, the young nurse who'd checked me in on my first day. I caught her in the hallway during her night shift. "Janelle," I said quietly, "how long have you worked here?" She looked startled. "A year, maybe. Why?" "Long enough to know when things aren't right." Her eyes softened. "Mrs. Caldwell." "Please," I interrupted it, "just Irene." I told her everything. About the forged documents, the missing jewelry, the house already being sold. She listened, her jaw tightening. When I finished, she said only, "If you really want out, I can call a cab. But once you go, you can't come back." I smiled. "That's the point, dear." At dawn, I was ready. I wore the same navy coat Robert had bought me the winter before he passed. It still smelled faintly of cedar and memory. In my purse, I carried only my ID, a little cash Nora had hidden in an old tissue box, and Robert's photo. I hugged her before I left. "If I make it out, I'll come back for you," I whispered. "You better," she said, squeezing my hand. "And don't let them take your story, Irene. That's worth more than all their money." Janelle walked me to the door under the pretense of taking out trash. The air outside felt like a miracle, cold, crisp, and mine. When the cab pulled up, I climbed in slowly, my knees trembling but my heart steady. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. I stared out at the waking city, at the sun rising over rooftops, at people walking freely, and said, "Home." But when we turned onto Maple Drive, my breath caught in my throat. The front yard was bare. The garden I'd tended for 40 years, gone. The curtains drawn, and in the middle of the lawn, hammered into the soil where my hydrangeas once bloomed, stood a white sign with red letters, "For sale. Contact Melissa Ward Realty." For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft. Of my life, my name, my memories. I stepped out of the cab and walked up the path, the one Robert and I had built stone by stone after our wedding. I touched the door frame, cold and unfamiliar. A young realtor stepped out, startled. "Oh, you must be the buyer." "I'm the owner," I said. She blinked, confused. "Oh, your daughter said you'd moved to Florida." I looked past her, into the hollow rooms beyond. My furniture gone, my walls stripped. It didn't even smell like home anymore. I turned back to the street, the wind tugging at my hair. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. Instead, I whispered to the empty house, "Not yet." That night, I checked into a small roadside motel with peeling wallpaper and buzzing lights. But when I opened my purse to count what little I had left, something slipped out. A worn business card tucked behind Robert's photo. Alan Pierce, attorney at law, his handwriting still scrawled across the back. "Call me if you ever need help again, Irene." And for the first time in months, I smiled. That night, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt armed. The next morning, I sat in the motel's tiny breakfast room with a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt dust, staring at that business card. Alan Pierce, attorney at law. He'd been my husband, Robert's lawyer. Sharp, steady, the kind of man who still believed in paperwork and promises. I hadn't seen him in almost a decade, but I remembered his voice at Robert's funeral. "If you ever need help again, Irene, call me before you sign anything." I'd signed plenty since then. and it was time to undo every one of them. I dialed his office number from the motel phone. To my surprise, he answered himself. "Alan Pierce speaking." "Alan," I said, my voice trembling. "It's Irene Caldwell. I don't know if you remember—" He interrupted softly. "Of course I do. Robert's wife. You had that garden with the blue hydrangeas. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. They're gone now," I whispered, "along with everything else." His tone shifted. "Tell me what happened." 2 hours later, I sat across from him in his downtown office, a smaller space than I remembered, cluttered with old files and the smell of coffee and dust. But Alan hadn't changed much. Gray hair neatly combed, tie slightly crooked, eyes still sharp with quiet intelligence. When I finished telling him everything, the nursing home, the forged guardianship, the missing possessions, the for sale sign, he didn't speak for a long time. He just leaned back, tapping a pen against his pad. Finally, he said, "Irene, what your children did is fraud, and possibly elder abuse." The words hung heavy in the air. I'd suspected it, but hearing it aloud made it real. He continued, "The good news is, you're legally competent. You were never declared unfit. That means any power of attorney they filed can be revoked, and any property they sold under false pretenses can be challenged." My breath caught. "So I can get it all back?" He looked me in the eye. "Not just back. You can make sure they never touch another cent." We spent the next few days rebuilding my life on paper. I signed revocation forms, filed statements, reissued my ID, reopened my bank account, changed my locks, all from that little office that smelled like old wood and justice. Alan's assistant, a kind woman named May, offered me tea and called me Miss Irene, like I was royalty. When I asked Alan how much all this would cost, he waved it off. "Robert was one of my closest friends," he said. "Let me help you finish what he started. Protecting you." One afternoon, as we reviewed the final draft of my new will, Alan leaned forward and asked gently, "What do you want to do with everything once it's yours again?" I stared at the papers before me. The house, the savings, the life insurance, all those numbers had once meant security, family, legacy. Now they felt hollow. "I don't want to leave it to them," I said quietly. "They've already shown me what they'd do with it." He nodded. "Then who deserves it?" I thought for a long moment. Then, almost without realizing, I said, "People like Nora, the ones they locked away and forgot, the ones still waiting for someone to fight for them." Alan's mouth curved into a small smile. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." He helped me create the Caldwell Fund for Elder Protection, a trust to assist residents of nursing homes who'd been wrongfully confined or financially exploited. Every dollar my children thought they'd inherit would now serve those they'd ignored. Before I left his office that day, I paused by the door. "Alan," I said, "do you think they'll come after me when they find out?" He looked up from his papers. "Oh, they will," he said calmly. "But next time, you'll be ready." He handed me an envelope. Inside were certified copies of every new document. My name restored, my rights reinstated, my will rewritten. For a long moment, I just stared at the papers. My hands were trembling, but not from fear this time, from power. As I stepped outside, the afternoon sun hit my face. For the first time in months, it didn't feel harsh. It felt like freedom. That evening, back at the motel, I called Nora. When she answered, her voice cracked with disbelief. "You did it," she whispered. "I did," I said, "and I'm coming for you next." She laughed, then cried, then whispered, "You're something else, Irene Caldwell." Maybe I was. Maybe for the first time in my life, I was exactly who I needed to be. I wasn't done being their mother, but I was done being their victim. It took 3 months for them to come. 3 months of silence, during which I rebuilt the parts of myself they tried to bury. I rented a small cottage on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, just a patch of green, a bird feeder, and a porch where I could breathe again. I planted new hydrangeas out front. They didn't bloom yet, but they would. And then, one Sunday morning, their car rolled into the driveway. Melissa stepped out first, perfectly dressed, hair shining, sunglasses covering whatever conscience she had left. David followed, slower, nervous, adjusting his tie, though it was barely 9 a.m. "Mom," she called sweetly, "you look, well." "Well enough to check myself out," I replied, "and well enough to know exactly what you did." She froze, her lips twitching before she managed a fake smile. "Oh, Mom, we just wanted to help you. We were worried." "Worried?" I cut her off. "You sold my house, emptied my accounts, and put me in a nursing home. That's not worry, Melissa. That's greed." David stepped forward, hands raised. "Let's not make this dramatic. You weren't safe on your own." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "You mean I wasn't convenient?" They followed me inside, uninvited, of course. The air was heavy, thick with all the words we'd never said when Robert was alive. I motioned toward the table where a neat stack of folders sat. "You should probably sit down," I said. Melissa hesitated. "What is this?" "My lawyer's work," I said. "You remember Alan Pierce?" David frowned. "Robert's old friend?" "That's right," I said. "He helped me rewrite my will." Their faces shifted. Confusion, then disbelief, then something darker. Melissa laughed, brittle and thin. "Mom, that's ridiculous. The will we signed last year?" "The one you forged," I interrupted. "Yes, Alan found that too. You didn't even bother changing the signature style. Sloppy work, Melissa." Her mouth fell open. David tried to intervene. "Look, Mom, we can sort this out. Just tell us what he said. What's in the new will?" I smiled then, a calm, deliberate smile that made them both uneasy. "Everything I own, the house, the savings, the life insurance, it's no longer yours. It's going to the Caldwell Fund for Elder Protection." They stared, blank. "It's a foundation," I explained gently, "for people like me. People you'd rather forget about once you've taken what you want." Melissa's voice rose, trembling with fury. "You can't do this to your own children." I met her eyes. "I didn't. You did it to yourselves." David's face turned red. "You don't mean that. You're angry, but we can fix this. We're family." "Family doesn't sell your house while you're still alive," I said quietly. "Family doesn't sign your name behind your back." I slid an envelope across the table, the certified will. "You'll find $1 each left to you both. Consider it a receipt for services rendered." Melissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're cruel," she spat. "You've lost your mind." "No," I said softly. "I finally found it." They stormed toward the door, muttering about lawyers, lawsuits, and "how dare you?" I didn't follow. I just stood there watching their silhouettes fade against the sunlight like ghosts I'd finally exorcised. When the door slammed shut, the silence that followed was beautiful. For the first time in years, the house was mine. Not in name, but in peace. I walked to the window and looked out at the new hydrangeas, small and green but alive. I whispered to them like old friends, "We'll bloom again soon." That evening, Alan called. "They came by my office," he said dryly, "tried to contest the documents." "And?" I asked. "They left when I showed them the notarized video recording of your signing. Melissa nearly fainted." I chuckled, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in too long. "Good." He paused. "You did the right thing, Irene. Not everyone finds the courage to start over this late in life." "I didn't start over," I said quietly. "I just stopped letting people finish me." I hung up the phone and sat by the window until the sky darkened. The garden shimmered under the porch light, alive and waiting. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel old. I felt timeless. A woman who had lost everything and still found her way back home. And in that stillness, surrounded by silence that no longer felt empty, I whispered to myself, for the first time in years, the quiet sounds like peace. Would you like me to continue with Section 6, Reflection and Resolve, the final section? Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in, quietly, like morning light through old curtains. For months, That's how my life began again. Slowly, softly, and entirely on my own terms. The cottage I rented became my refuge. Every morning I'd brew my coffee and sit on the porch, with my robe still tied loose, listening to the world wake up. Birds in the hedges, wind in the grass. The kind of silence that used to scare me now felt like a friend who finally spoke my language. I wasn't rich anymore. The mansion was gone, the investments drained. But for the first time, I had something far better than comfort. I had peace. Sometimes I'd look at the new hydrangeas sprouting from the soil and think of Robert. He always said, "You can't control who breaks your heart, Irene, but you can decide who gets to do it twice." I smiled each time I remembered it, because he was right. Word spread about what I'd done. The nursing home discharge, the revoked guardianship, the new will. People whispered about the old lady who fought back. Some called it brave, others called it foolish. But I didn't care what they called it. I cared that somewhere out there, another woman might hear my story and realize she wasn't powerless. That's why, when Alan suggested I make a public statement about the Caldwell Fund for Elder Protection, I said yes. We filmed it in his office. Just a short video, me sitting in a chair, speaking plainly to the camera. "My name is Irene Caldwell," I began, "and I want to tell anyone listening, don't ever believe you're too old to take back your life. If someone tries to silence you, remember, the pen still belongs in your hand." The video went online, and within days, letters started coming. Handwritten notes, typed messages, even flowers from strangers. One woman wrote, "My sister tried to do the same thing to me. Because of your story, I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow." Another said, "You gave me the courage to leave a place I didn't belong." Every word felt like a small echo of my own past, proof that what I'd endured hadn't been for nothing. I kept in touch with Nora, too. After I funded the paperwork for her release, she moved into an apartment near the coast. She'd call every Sunday evening, her voice stronger each time. "Can you believe it, Irene?" She'd laugh. "I'm learning to paint. My son still doesn't know where I am. Feels good." "It feels right," I'd say. We never spoke about revenge, only freedom. We both knew that sometimes the quiet act of reclaiming your own life is the loudest revenge of all. Months passed, then a year. The hydrangeas bloomed blue that summer, a deep, defiant blue that made the neighbors stop and stare. Melissa and David never came back, not for holidays, not for apologies. Once I saw a letter in the mail with Melissa's handwriting on the return address. I burned it unopened. There are some things forgiveness can't fix, and peace doesn't require pretending otherwise. Now I spend my days volunteering at the local library, helping others write their life stories. Some of them are younger, some older, but all of them carry that same look I once wore, the look of someone trying to find the strength to begin again. Sometimes I tell them, it's never too late to rewrite your ending. I'm living proof. And when they ask how it feels to start over at 74, I tell them the truth. It feels like waking up from a long sleep. Every night before bed, I light a small candle for Robert and place it beside his photo. I tell him what I've done, who I've helped, what I've learned. I tell him that our promise, to grow old with dignity, wasn't broken after all. It was just delayed until I remembered how to keep it. Then I sit by the window, watch the moonlight fall across my new garden, and think of the life I've built from the ashes of betrayal. And I whisper, to him, to myself, to anyone who might still be listening. I didn't lose my family. I just found myself again.